So earlier today I sat down with Mr. Barry Sheerman MP, a serving member for Huddersfield who has served for 40 years. He's recently called time on his political career, so I took him through some of his career highlights, things that he's done, and what he plans to do on his retirement. So you've decided to call time on your career as an MP after 40 years. What are your immediate feelings following this decision?
Well, one of the lovely things that I keep saying to people, say, "You're not going, Barry." I said, well, unless you know a secret that I don't, I suspect I've got another 2.5 years at least to make mischief here. Because, if it runs, which most people think it will, the full term, that's not till May over 2 years from now. So, and it gives you a chance to kind of get used to the idea that you won't be here anymore, and be able to go in as I do this morning and see that as a statement on the government's determination to alter human rights legislation. So I could go in there, intervene, to challenge it, because I think, I'm not a lawyer, but I always look at where is the thrust coming from a piece of legislation, and I don't see it coming from the academic community, from the legal community, or even the business community. Where is it coming from? It's obviously coming from the more and more strident right wing of the Conservative Party. So it gives you a lovely opportunity, or like that last Thursday, when on a Thursday I can get 3, 4, even sometimes on a really good Thursday, 5 questions. I can usually get a question on the main business, say environment, an urgent question, a good question, two questions, the ordinary questions. Then I can get a question on a statement. The week before last, so I got 2 questions in ordinary questions, then a question on the new report on fan-based reforms in the football, and I got a question to Leader of the House on a particular, what was it? It was
dialysis, wasn't it?
Yeah,
dialysis
of children at home. So you get 4 or 5 questions, and if you've got my experience and you're a relatively skilled parliamentarian, the real joy is actually making Parliament work. And as I say, the answer to your original question is, I see this a really very pleasant transition over the next 2.5 years. So I'm still around to make mischief, and I will enjoy it. And it's not abrupt, because I'm a social enterprise, a social entrepreneur. Quite a few of the things that I run, the Clean Air Commission, the Autism Commission, the new commissions on the renaissance to the River Thames, all those I will continue being heavily involved in. So in a sense, I've set up, lots of good things. Huddersfield, the sustainable town, I will continue with that. So it's rather nice that, because I've started, that someone told me the other day, over 50 social enterprises. And a lot of them are still alive and well and kicking. It gives me lots of interest. I sometimes forget what I've started. Someone, 18 months ago, the people at SERA, the Socialist Environmental Resource Association, phoned me and said, "Could you do a lead article in our silver anniversary edition?" I said, "Why me?" And they said, "You started us."
Brilliant.
I was asked to. There's a very good group around cooperatives, and I'm a cooperative MP, called Progressive Cooperators, which has always been a bit of kind of a ability to push the more conventional big wing of the cooperative party, to push the cooperative movement. Be a bit of a bit of a gadfly.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
that bloody, I see you've been addressing the annual conference of progressive cooperators, Sheerman. I said, yeah, I started them before I was in Parliament.
brilliant. Well, just on what you were saying there, you've been very vocal on a number of projects inside Huddersfield, namely the demolition of the old college buildings around Trinity Street. What have you done, or what will you do to push this and ensure that it's followed up after you leave office?
Well, by training, I'm an LSE economist. You know, I'm a social scientist, both the first and second degrees. And I was a mature student. I'd been in the chemical industry, the paint factory actually, for 4 years before I got. I was 21 before I got to university, and I'd been seen a bit of, so I was quite a. I've been around a bit. Was probably a bit more mature politically than some of the average 18-year-olds. And because I only wanted to go to the London School of Economics because of its radical traditions. And indeed, one of my lecturers was Ralph Miliband, David and Ed Miliband's father, Ralph Miliband. And he I always thought he was quite a vulgar Marxist in a proper sense of the word. That's not a derogatory term, but he was a Marxist, and he had a little acolytes, usually full of left-wing students, almost the disciples followed him around. Of course, I'd been around in the world. I restarted the Fabian Society, LSE. He didn't like that, and really? Who would think all those years later, he's radical that he was. He helped us because I wrote with Isaac Kramnik the biography of Harold Lasky, who was this very famous professor at the LSE, who in the 1930s, when there was no Labour Party, McDonald's, starting leaving the Labour Party with hardly any seats, with Sir Philip Snowden, with strong Huddersfield connections, they all, there wasn't a voice for the left. And Harold Lasky had become, with his base in the LSE and radio, he was very good at radio performance, became the voice of the Labour Party. He actually chaired the Labour Party in 1945 when we won. But I wrote the biography with a guy called Isaac Kramnik, and Ralph Miliband was a sort of academic adopted son of Lasky when he came as a Jewish migrant to the LSE. And so they were very close, and he was quite helpful with writing the biography. But he's a guy that gave us the only poor review in the New Left Review. All those years later, who would have thought David Miliband, when he came out of Oxford, Ralph phoned me and said, my son David's coming out of Oxford and would like to get into politics. Would you meet him to give him some advice? And nudge, nudge, have you got a job for him? And both the brothers now say that I interviewed him and turned him down for a job. I didn't. We only had 2 staff in those days, and I didn't have a vacancy, but I did give him advice. Yeah. And many years later, of course, when he becomes Foreign Secretary, he hires one of my daughters as his special advisor.
Oh, right.
Madeline Sadler. And she ran his campaign for leader. And when we lost, he went to America as president of the International Rescue Committee, and she went with him, and is now the chief operating officer of the International Rescue Committee. So she and her husband and 4 of my grandchildren are in New York because of that.
Wow, it's a bit more exotic than Huddersfield, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of history. You forget. The place is full of history. The fact. You look at the House of Commons, and what's Margaret's second? And Margaret Hodge was at the LSE with me. We both announced that we wouldn't stand the next election together. She did it one week, I did it the next. And Margaret yeah, it was my year at the LSE, and so I knew. So I do know that her connections to the Labour Party. She knows mine. Yeah, really interesting linkages that you wouldn't, on the surface, realise.
Definitely.
However, you've got to control me because I go off piste.
No, it's fine. It's perfect. So in your time as an MP, you faced off with 7 different prime ministers. I think, if I've done my research right.
Yeah, that
Um,
sounds about right.
which one of them?
A lot of prime ministers. The one thing that didn't come out of your questions, if you're a good MP, there is a fundamental thing, because I was trained as an economist. I became the young MP candidate in December 1976. I had some time to run in before the December, the 97 election. And I looked at Huddersfield, this traditional industrial manufacturing town, very successful, top end of the market, the top textiles, the finest worsteds, high class engineering. It was the posh town. Everyone around West Yorkshire hates Huddersfield, especially in Kirklees, because we were the posh town, and we weren't very nice about it. We sneered and looked down at Dewsbury, who made, as you know, made inferior rework cloth called shoddy.
Yeah.
We paid. You got the higher wages in Huddersfield and so on. And so there was that long kind of tradition that lasts today. That the reason why when the amalgamation of all those small local authorities to one local authority, and anyone with any common sense would have called it Huddersfield, the Great Huddersfield, where such was the enmity towards Huddersfield, it had to have some daft name like Kirklees. Which doesn't even exist in Kirklees, because Kirklees, actually where Robin Hood's supposed to be buried, is in Calderdale.
Yeah, I know that the concept of Kirklees has come under a lot of fire, especially with the signs on the way into town.
Let's go there. But you see, I was in the concept. I said, let's look at this town, highly successful in its own ways, but times are changing really fast. Manufacturing jobs are disappearing because of the modernization of manufacturing processes, robots and high tech spinning and weaving. Everything's going to change. And look at the rest of the world. Manufacturing jobs are going to diminish really fast. So how are we going to how will we achieve the good life in Huddersfield? And I took it as a sacred responsibility to evaluate what my town was like. Where does its wealth come? Where does the jobs come? Where does its, the quality of life, health and well-being, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, times are changing fast. We've got to prepare for that. And I got a team of people in Huddersfield, well-intentioned business people. ICI and then was a big employer, got some money from them. And we hired a Terence Conran. Now, Conran was known for habitat and a designer of furniture and all that. But he also had a consultancy where, high level would consult on anything. And we hired them, I got the money, and we hired them to evaluate Huddersfield and say, what the strengths, weaknesses, how do we position ourselves to be a town in transition with some real plan to face the future. And they came back, and I was guided by what they said. They said, look, manufacturing jobs are going to go. You have got to broaden your economy. Your polytechnic ought to be grown and become a university. You ought to have high quality high schools and sixth form colleges to attract managers to send their kids to. You need a really strong FE college. You've got a rather old-fashioned one in a decrepit building. And then turning to sport, they said, your sport's terrible. You've got a football stadium that's falling to pieces that goes back to the 1920s, and your Fartown ground for rugby league is even worse.
Yeah.
But right across the piece, and they said quite a lot about health and well-being and hospitals and health. And we put that team together and said, right, that's what we got to tackle. And sorted the university. University has grown exponentially, biggest employer in Huddersfield. Remarkable. If you look at the link, I think Tony Blair the other day said, you want to know the difference between towns that are successful and growing and anything else, it's the link between that and higher education, having a university. He was calling, as I mentioned in question time this week, more universities, upgrade all the FE colleges to polytechnics. It's a good Blairite idea. but we delivered on most of that, the expansion of the university, the quality sixth form colleges, right across the piece, diversity, coming together with making the textile centre of excellence the leading textile centre in the whole country, with all the skills of the textile industry nationwide are focused on Huddersfield on the Leeds Road. And then turning to the leisure bit, I had, when I worked in industry, worked as a lowly apprentice in Slough ICI Paints Division, and my boss was Sir Dennis Henderson. And when I became an MP with a very large ICI plant, when in 1979 employed a large number of people. And so if you'd ever worked for ICI, you were privileged to go to lunch and dinner with the chair twice a year. And Dennis Henderson was Sheerman, and he was rather amusing. He'd been my boss when I was a lowly apprentice at Slough, in the paints division. And we got on very well. And so when we were looking for the land for a new stadium, I went to see Dennis Henderson, said, look, ICI's got a load of land there. Could you carve out a parcel to build a new stadium? And he said, Barry, you're on. And of course, we got that just for a peppercorn, He did say, smiled and said, don't dig too deep in the foundations. I've been burying stuff there for years. So, we got the land for a new stadium. We got the very best leading architects. And I was lucky because that time we had a really good leader of the Labour Party. I had a hand in a bit of a coup. John Harman was elected one day and become a leader of Kirklees the next. One of the brightest, youngest head of maths in any school in Yorkshire. He became leader of the Labour Party. He hired a really good chief executive, Rob Hughes, and the team could see all these objectives to deliver on. And we, that team with that business support, when you think, we started to have this sort of pride and various other things just to deliver, a sterling prize, the best new building of the year when the stadium was opened. And look what that's done. If you take the university, if you take the stadium, always looking. Last days of the Labour Party, I tried and better tried to get, you should understand this because you remember All Saints buildings were falling down.
Yeah.
Absolutely awful. And we should have got a new build out of building schools of the future when we were putting a lot of money in the new school build, and we could not get Kirklees to move. The Catholic Archbishop of Leeds was very unhelpful. And in the end, we got nothing. So I was chair of the education committee, and I went to see Gordon Brown. I said, look, at nothing. How to build his schools of future because the local authority can't agree on anything. He said, what would you like then, Barry? I said, I need the money for a new FE college. And I got it. And so, in a sense, if you're an MP, you're always looking at, that is a magnificent college building. Just got that before I've got a studio school in the package, a studio school up at Dalton.
Right, well, that's where I actually live in Dalton.
Oh, do you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
well, that was but that's your job as an MP, to bring teams together, work as a team, trying to get leadership. Why today we still, and we did Huddersfield, Huddersfield Pride. Then that became Huddersfield 2000. Yeah, it was a long time ahead to the turn of the century.
yeah,
Yeah, and we started planning in a group called Huddersfield 2000. And when we've done that, we called it Huddersfield 2000 plus to start, the next thing. And then with climate change and the environment gradually becoming much more important, and I was one of the early innovators in that. I started a organization, Huddersfield and Halifax, called Urban Minds, which was about using the waste that flows from towns and cities as a new raw material rather than digging up the Earth's crust and taking virgin material. So that was starting. And so when my most recent incarnation of Huddersfield would say, look, Huddersfield's the typical town of Britain. Yeah, if I say the average town of Britain, people hate it. But it's the typical town in Britain, Look at most of the criteria. It is. It's a reflection, it's a microcosm. A lot of new product had started in Huddersfield, tested in Huddersfield because of that. Anyway, so we said if we could make Huddersfield a sustainable town under the rigor of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, if we could do it. We could say everyone can do it. 500 towns in the UK could do it. And so we've never given up and said, oh, we did that job,
yeah.
Different organizations have come and gone, town city renewal and so on. But we've always tried to take that overarching, building teams. So what's the next challenge? And it's been quite successful in a quite nice way.
Yeah, I mean, building on sort of all those challenges that you've sort of set yourself or being given, what has been in your political career? What has been your best moment?
It's a very difficult question, that is, because there are various things I've done in national politics and local politics. In national politics, I'm a very nice leading expert on from the World Health Organization and WHO, and so Barry Sheerman, with his obsession with road safety, he's maintained over many years, has probably saved more lives than any other politicians on the planet. Now, I feel rather nervous about that because I saw a terrible accident when I was a young university lecturer, 2 young people being thrown out of a car, dying by the side of the road. And I myself had a very bad smash on the way back from our second daughter's baptism, and guy had just come off the Irish ferry, and I don't know what mistake he made, but he drove into us head on, and the seatbelt saved me. So saved all of us. When I got into Parliament, I was determined to 13 times seatbelts had been defeated. Usually because of the usual right wing, the Tory party said, it's an infringement of personal limits and all that. Anyway, we organised. My first the only private members bill was my first one back in 1980, which I banned children from being carried in cars without restraint. Yeah, and it failed because the right-wing Tory shouted object. But then Ken Clarke, the young transport minister, let me amend the 1981 transport bill so that became law.
Right.
He thought that would keep me happy. But I had secretly been plotting with friends in the House of Lords, and we bounced the adult seatbelts compulsory on the night before the royal wedding, Charles and Diana, and bounced it into the House of Commons. They buggered off because it was a public holiday the next day. We kept our troops there, and it became law.
Wow.
And even in the UK, that saved a lot of lives. And then I spoke for the governor of California to launch his seatbelt campaign, the governor of New York to launch his campaign. And then I became chairman of Global Road Safety Partnerships for World Bank. And then I became chair of the Global Legislators for Road Safety, and eventually a new organization on road safety research called the International Committee of Road Safety Research, which I still chair. But it was nice when someone said, my obsession means I'm probably saved more lives than any other politician, and I sometimes get quiet about that because I am obsessive about it. I'm obsessive about a lot of things. But when people were chuntering about, oh, Barry Sheerman, what's he ever done? And said the only thing he's ever done is seat belts, which hurt. Actually, I've done more worldwide about, the biggest killer of children and young people worldwide is death in road accidents. The biggest, more than any virus, anything. And it's been my mission in life to save those children and young people's lives. And we haven't wiped it all out, but we've made bloody steady progress. Yeah. Really, I started the European Transport Safety Council, ETSC, which is right across Europe. Then we started the Global Road Safety Partnership. So, you've got to be obsessional about them. Don't give up on them, even if people, And it's similar with my sustainability mission. And all sort of fragments. I've got one of my newest things. I chair the Clean Air Commission, directly related to climate change. 40% of our pollution in Britain comes from transport. And we know how to do something about that. So I'm always looking for national campaigns and international campaigns. I mean, I was fighting the anti-vaxxers years ago, because long before COVID, because the most common transmittable disease killing children is measles. And because of the crazy people, including this Dr. Wakefield, disgracefully linking the MMR jab to autism, and I chair the Autism Commission, as I said, it's killing lots of children worldwide. Nigeria, parts of France, big parts of rural France, where people have got this feeling that they don't want their children jabbed with MMR. And loads of people, measles that disappeared. It's coming back. So I'm a campaigner, and sometimes that means I'm campaigning in the UK. You won't like this probably if you're a cameraman or anything like that, but by the relay or enthusiast, because after I got some of my seatbelt stuff, people asked me to put life into the campaign against smoking in public places, and that was my next campaign. And when we thought it was absolutely hopeless, we were working at it, debates and so on. We're going to keep going for years. The Irish suddenly introduced a ban, and all of a sudden the world changed, and we got it through. But, with its national, local, it's the campaigns I love. Greenstream, the charity I started in Yorkshire with a whole group of enthusiasts. I'd worked out the high levels of pollution in all our rivers and streams, and no one was doing anything about it. I went to see Yorkshire Water, and they said, well, Barry, don't you realise every river in Britain is polluted and unfit for people to swim in? Not just Yorkshire. And I worked very closely early days of the Surfers Against Sewage and all those. Now I chair a commission on the renaissance on the River Thames. Because that's we're trying to bring that back as a major transport hub of our capital city. And people said, Barry, the last time I looked, the River Thames didn't flow through Huddersfield. And of course, my riposte to that is I was born in Sunbury-on-Thames. I went to school in Hampton-on-Thames, and I've worked by the river for 40 years. I think I've got the credentials.
I think definitely. You mentioned dealing.
But one of the questions was a bit naughty, I thought. but it was quite right because journalists should be naughty in their questions. And you asked me, well, you didn't come from Huddersfield. I was a bit of a carpetbagger, and I was looking for a good, safe seat. I was a co-op sponsored, I was a cooperator. Someone in the co-op movement said, Barry, would you be interested? We want a good candidate for Huddersfield. And back in the day, in the 1976 and summer, the local Labour Party interviewed 60 candidates, 6 every weekend. What an exhaustive process. And I won against a lot of local people, and there was a very famous special advisor to Tony Benn called Stuart Holland, who was a favourite. I beat Peter Jackson, former Labour MP. It was a very good thing, but I did become the member, the candidate. And I think what is more important, that when I became the member of Parliament, I moved to West Yorkshire. I sent my children to local state schools, and I rooted myself in my local community because I thought I wanted my family to know what local health services, educational services are like. And so all my kids went to local comprehensives and then finished up at Greenhead.
Would you argue that that's the bit that people don't see when they just see somebody that has come into Huddersfield, is their MP now and isn't originally from there? Is that the side that people don't see?
Yeah, I put my roots down. No, there's a few cranks. If you read the cranky stuff, there's a lot of people think I'm from planet Zog, but actually, if I want to look at the strangest people on social media, they believe, first of all, that I live in Cambridge, which is hilarious. I had two daughters who went to Cambridge, and one still lives in Cambridge, and she's married to the senior tutor at Fitzwilliam, and she lectures in Cambridge. So I know Cambridge extremely well because the two daughters went there, including the daughter who works for David Miliband. But a son went to Bristol and a daughter to Edinburgh. But in terms of the nutty fringe of social media, I think I live in Cambridge from some crazy reason. And secondly, well, they always have a picture of Castle Hill in most of their social. But what else do they believe? And then never mentioned the fact that I came to Huddersfield and totally grassrooted myself. All the family grew up locally. We lived locally, and as I say, I have led from the front in all the kind of get Huddersfield into the Super League at every level. So there's a very small right fringe that say those sort of things.
Yeah, so one thing that I picked on, I think it was this week or last week, you called for on-the-spot fines for people that don't wear masks. I noticed earlier on you said you'd taken on the anti-vaxxers very early on.
Yeah.
But this is a more modern thing. Do you think that that's something that people would embrace?
I think in certain settings it should be, because what is the point of seeing on buses and tubes and others that you could be fined? That is the law. You can be fined for not wearing a mask on transport, but hardly anyone ever is. Now, I don't really want to be punitive, but if a few people were fined, perhaps they will get the lesson that it's best to wear that mask and save lives. My whole I feel today, this week, suddenly we've shaken up. Here's a new variant. It's spreading like mad. We're sitting in London. One of my daughters, my youngest daughter, was tested positive yesterday. She's got 3 young daughters and a husband. And she's had COVID. This new variant is spreading like mad, faster here in the southeast where I'm sitting now, actually, than in the north. Although I picked up that the first case has been picked up in Huddersfield yesterday, but it is spreading so fast. And the two things that I think are unforgivable is that most of the people in intensive care, clogging up our hospitals, the people who refuse to get a vaccination. Hardly any of them who got vaccinated are clogging up the ICU beds. And, of course, I don't want to be terribly punitive, but there's a balance, between being firm, giving a nudge, and sometimes, well, as you know, coming out of this fiasco about Christmas parties in number 10, the fact is that in other parts of the country, people who had Christmas parties last year have been fined.
Yeah.
There are fines for different behaviours. So I'm not inventing anything new. It's just, I find it highly, I think some forced comparisons are made. This is the one world where these variants can kill so many people. Yes, if we can't persuade, there has to be a bit of a push. I don't want anything draconian, but I just want to save lives.
Definitely. So I'll leave you with this, but it might be a little bit of a difficult one to answer. If you could sum up your career in one word, what would it be?
My career? Oh, that's different. Well, one word's naughty, because I could come up with, persistence. Yeah, I keep on going. Sometimes I pick up, campaigns, the new campaigns I've thought up myself, or something inspires me. Yeah. It's unfair, because I came into politics for a more equal society, for social justice, for transforming our country so that everyone had a chance at the good life.
Yeah.
And it's that little set of things. Why I was a poor kid from a poor background. We struggled as a family. I was lucky I was the youngest son. I was the only one that went off to the posh grammar school. I was the only one that was lucky at some time with real mates in the paint industry who said, "Hey, Barry, you should get back and get an education." And a nice girl I met, who I later married, also said I ought to think again. Yeah, so when I was persuaded to sell my Lambretta scooter to start a window cleaning around and selling stuff in Petticoat Lane Market, and I paid my way through FE College, Technical College, and got my 3 A levels and got a scholarship to the LSE. Now, but I look back and I was lucky. By luck, some nice people said to me, "Barry, lad, you're wasting your talent." And I spent a lot of my time identifying people who I think have got some talent and they need that little push. Yeah. Not posh kids from posh backgrounds who say, "Mr. Sheerman, could I be your intern?" And sometimes I have to take some of those, but normally to balance that, I'm taking kids who would never have the chance. And so my great passion is finding talent and getting people to think about the good life. Yeah, whether it's people in Huddersfield about what is the good life. Yeah, and it's usually around, a mixture of things. I interviewed a whole bunch of people. The people, when I was writing the article about the good life, I talked to a lot of taxi drivers. London black cab taxi drivers were wonderful, because you would say to them, "What's a good life?" "Well, mate," he said, "pay off my mortgage, pay off my car, a month in Spain every year. Good schools for my kids, and it was a list, so much in the back. They had a little list of what the good life was for a London taxi driver, and I think all of us, one of the lovely things I think about the new front team and Les, what's his face? Wes Streeting, not Les Streeting. Wes Streeting. He said, "Look, why don't we have something for little kids, from less privileged backgrounds? 10, was it 5 things to have by 10, or a bucket list? Yeah. We started a thing where I chaired the John Clare, the Poets House in Helpston. I'm very passionate about getting children into the countryside, because if you don't get kids to visit the countryside, they won't love it or value it. And I raised £3 million. We bought the John Clare House that had become a private residence. And that most famous poet, because he's a working class poet, he was still a working class labourer, but once he learned to read and write, couldn't stop writing. One of the most famous poets of the environment. So we bought his house, we turned it back to what it was when he lived there. And it's a gem for a visit. And it's a centre for learning outside the country, outside the classroom. And, when little kids come to the countryside, they suddenly fall in love with it. Being able to hug a tree or see see rabbits running, or it's so inspirational. So it's not just about
new, isn't it?
Not just about the bloody poetry. You ought to come. It's really special.
I might well take you up on that.
It's between Stamford and Peterborough.
Right.
Yet, but trouble is, you do so many things. I mean, I bought a pub and sold it. I bought a church and sold it. All for my different charities. So, but look, if you give them, if you give me a slightly longer choice, it's be serious but have fun. I don't do anything that's not fun. When you bring teams together and work together, at the end of the day, if they're just doing it, because they're there and think it's worthy and so on, that's fine. But if you enjoy it, fun, and you spread a bit of love at the time as you're doing it, that's a good life to me.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you thoroughly enjoy your retirement whenever that comes.
Well, keep in touch with how your career goes.
So that was Mr. Barry Sheerman, a wonderful man to interview, and a very easy man to talk to as well. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, whatever people say on this platform. Give it around as wherever you like. And if you're interested in more of my content, there's some more on this channel, and my links to my Twitter and my blog will be in the description for you to have a look at as well. Thank you very much.